There's a very particular feeling that almost all of us have experienced at some point, that strange discomfort when walking down a dark hallway, or that need to turn on the light before entering an empty room, even though we know perfectly well that there's absolutely nothing dangerous waiting there. This reaction isn't a whim or a childish silliness we should have outgrown. It's actually one of the oldest instincts our brain still possesses. To understand why this happens, we have to go back hundreds of thousands of years, to a time when humans weren't the dominant predators on the planet. We were prey. Our ancestors shared the territory with lions, hyenas, leopards, and other large carnivores that hunted primarily at night, taking advantage of poor human visibility. Unlike these animals, human eyes aren't adapted to see well in low-light conditions. We lack the reflective layer that many nocturnal predators have in their retinas, and that put us at a huge disadvantage when the sun went down. In that context, any individual who felt alert, tense, or outright afraid in the dark was more likely to stay close to the group, near the fire, and avoid unnecessary exposure during the night. This cautious behavior saved lives for generations, and over time, this alert reaction became ingrained in our biology. It's not a conscious decision, it's an automatic mechanism activated in a very ancient part of the brain called the amygdala, responsible for processing fear and triggering the fight-or-flight response long before the rational part of your brain has time to analyze the situation. Here's the key fact that explains why we still feel this today, even though we live in apartments with locks and no lions nearby. The amygdala doesn't distinguish between the real danger of 100,000 years ago and the darkness of your room today. For your most primitive brain, the lack of light remains synonymous with vulnerability. It still interprets darkness as a scenario where you can't anticipate threats, and that uncertainty is enough to trigger an alert response, even though your rational mind knows perfectly well that you are safe. This also explains why the fear of the dark is often more intense during childhood. Young children haven't yet fully developed their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logical thinking and controlling emotional impulses. This region only finishes maturing around the age of 25. That's why a child can feel absolute terror in the darkness of their room, while an adult usually manages to calm that feeling by appealing to logic, even though the underlying instinct remains the same. Another interesting element has to do with sound. In the dark, our brain relies much more on hearing to detect potential threats, which is why any unexpected noise at night, a creak, a bang, a sound that would go completely unnoticed during the day, can trigger a disproportionate alert reaction. Neuroscience studies have confirmed that amygdala activity increases significantly in low-light conditions, even in response to neutral stimuli, simply because the brain interprets the lack of visual information as a situation of greater potential risk. There is also a purely optical explanation that reinforces all of this. The human eye relies on two types of photoreceptor cells: cones, responsible for color vision in good light, and rods, responsible for vision in low light but without the ability to distinguish colors or fine details. In darkness, we depend almost exclusively on rods, which makes our vision blurry, colorless, and with a much more limited field of detail. This real and measurable reduction in the quality of our visual perception is not a subjective sensation, it is a physiological fact, and the brain correctly interprets it as an objective decrease in our ability to detect danger, which automatically increases our state of alertness. It is also worth mentioning that this fear is not exclusive to humans. Behavioral studies in rodents, primates, and other species show similar patterns of increased caution and anxiety in the dark or in open spaces without cover, especially in animals that have historically been prey to nocturnal predators. This reinforces the idea that this is not a culturally learned fear, but rather a mechanism shared among different species that evolved under similar pressures. The invention of artificial light, first with fire and much later with electricity, drastically changed our relationship with the night, but it did so on a timescale too short for biological evolution to modify an instinct that took hundreds of thousands of years to develop. This mechanism, which in prehistory was a crucial evolutionary advantage, can become a problem today when it becomes exaggerated, leading to what is clinically known as nyctophobia, an intense and persistent fear of the dark that can affect an adult's sleep and quality of life. However, feeling some natural discomfort in the dark, without reaching that extreme, is not a sign of weakness or immaturity. It is simply evidence that your brain continues to function exactly as it was designed to for hundreds of thousands of years, prioritizing your survival above any modern logic. Interestingly, this same instinct can be triggered even in the complete absence of any real stimulus, which explains phenomena like the feeling of being watched in an empty, dark room, or that almost universal habit of peeking under the bed before going to sleep as children. Evolutionary psychology suggests that when in doubt, it's much cheaper in terms of survival to assume there's a threat and check it out than to ignore an ambiguous signal and risk being wrong. This principle, known as the safer error bias, has been documented in numerous species and explains why we prefer to overcheck rather than undercheck, even when we rationally know that the actual probability of danger is practically zero. So the next time you feel that shiver when you turn off the light, or that almost automatic need to check that everything is in order before going to sleep, don't see it as irrational. See it as an echo of your ancestors, that part of you that for generations had to survive in a world far more dangerous than the one you know today. Understanding why we react this way doesn't eliminate fear completely, but it does change how we experience it. And if you're interested in continuing to discover why your mind does what it does, then I invite you to subscribe to the channel, because here we'll continue exploring those answers together.